I've been wanting to go back to Mario 64 for a very long time. I say a very long time, even though I only finished it for the first time last year when I ranked all the stars, but ever since then, I've been wanting to go through the game again just to re-experience what quickly became my favorite Mario game. You've probably lost count at how many times you've heard it before. Super Mario 64 is the best Mario game. Super Mario 64 revolutionized gaming forever, and to be fair, yeah, it kinda did. Mario completely changed the game from his 2D adventures as we talked about before. While some of the early titles don't hold up or seem all that great like they used to, it's really Mario 64 that permanently cemented Super Mario as Mr. Gaming. I know Mario 64 has its haters, and trust me, I used to be one of them. But when you really sit down, take the time out of your day to get lost in the world of Mario, you may find yourself in a better place than when you started. As someone who did grow up with the Mario franchise, I always found my perspective on this game to be very interesting, to say the least. That's not because I'm a self-centered narcissist, but that's just because I didn't have the pleasure of growing up with this game like so many others. I used to very much dislike this game and went as far as to call it the worst 3D Mario game. My views on this game were pretty skewed, to say the least. I just couldn't understand why so many people enjoyed this game as much as they did. To me, Super Mario Galaxy was the pinnacle of Mario gaming, and as we'll come to learn, my view on these games have almost swapped completely. I still love Super Mario Galaxy, don't get me wrong, but it's not the perfect and untouchable game I thought it once was. That title, it doesn't really go to Mario 64 either. I have problems with it, but we'll get into that later. But it's safe to say that Mario 64 is more than just a game. Despite anyone's personal feelings about it, whether they be negative or positive, this game still has an unbelievable legacy behind it that goes far beyond any regular game. You can ignore my feelings on any other Mario game from the classic era. If Mario was known for any one thing in the gaming landscape, it's how he changed it forever. Mario 64 is a game about many things. Discovery is at the heart of that game. For Nintendo's first ever romp in the realm of 3D, this game must be a timeless masterpiece for how well it's been able to hold up this entire time. I mean, there were 3D platformers before Mario 64, and not many, and none were like it. This is a game that had to set the standard on what a 3D platformer, hell, a 3D game in general should be. It couldn't follow any footsteps because there were none to follow. This game was the first of its kind, and even today, it's never really been replicated. Not even by Nintendo themselves, but I guess it is pretty hard to strike lightning in a bottle twice. The real question to be asked is, how do you possibly create something that has never been done before, especially on a scale like this? The jump of an extra axis in gaming couldn't have been easy for anyone. In the Mario games up till now, we've carefully crafted every stage and level down to the individual pixel. Take jumping for example. Implementing jumping in 3D is really difficult. In earlier Mario games, we were able to measure the number of pixels Mario could jump and know exactly what was possible. But this time, we had to design the levels so that as long as the jump was close enough, you'd make it. It was too hard for the player to judge. This very long quote was taken from a developer interview on Mario 64 on one of the official strategy guides released for the game. This should just outline how difficult it must have been to try something completely new. Mario 64 makes all of the movement and level design that accompanies it look seamless and easy. They nailed it so well in the first try. That's just because nailing Mario's movement was something they knew they had to hit at the head of the game if they wanted it to succeed. It was actually what they spent most of the development time on, so much so that the course count had to be halved just to beat deadlines. Originally, there was supposed to be 32 courses in the game, but due to time, that number was cut to 15. And even then, according to Miyamoto, some courses were like thrown together or something like that. I couldn't find the actual quote. My point being is that if developing games were difficult in the first place, making a game on a plane that just didn't really exist yet must have been the final boss of game development. And I think this has to do with how they wanted to carry Mario going forward. Mario 64 not only plays unique, but its structure too. In 2D Mario games, your goal was to move from left to right and make it to the end of the stage with your limbs intact. Making a sequel to those games must have not been too bad because the precedent is already there. You simply take what worked in the game previous and add upon it in a later title. This was the structure that Mario games would originally follow, even adding things like new power-ups and a world map. Each game, except for the non-Mario game, would continue to improve greatly on what came before, even going as far to push the NES to its limits on what it could do. Mario World came out and it shook the gaming landscape, seeming to have nearly perfected the Mario formula. Nintendo could have just easily developed a Mario game in 3D in the same vein, have Mario on a world map going from left to right, or in 3D in this case, forward to back to reach the goal and move on to the next level. Now, that's not to say they didn't do that. There are some levels in this game that heavily remind me of a classic Mario level brought to 3D, but the structure was completely different. This game was a Collectathons were huge back in the day, definitely because Mario 64 revolutionized that formula, but first, they had to make it. What is a collectathon though? Well, the basic rundown is that you run around a giant map and collect things. That's about really as simple as it gets. In Mario 64's case, you're launched into a level with different objectives to complete. Some requiring to get in a certain point in the level, some require fighting a boss. The only constants of each level is that there will always be a mission where you collect 8 red coins around the level. In most cases, this is just to test your knowledge and skill when it comes to a certain level. Or your lethal lava land and do absolutely none of that. There's always going to be a hidden star as well, one not shown on the mission select screen. This mission requires you to collect 100 coins. That's it. This sounds easy, but this mission is really the ultimate test of knowledge when it comes to any level in this game. Routes on these missions are so much fun because there will always be more than 100 coins per level. Your task is to find out how to get them. You can grab coins by getting the ones scattered throughout the level, breaking blocks, looting corpses, GTA style. It doesn't matter how you do it, you just need to get the bag. Now, with all of this info thrown at you and you're coming off the heels of the classic Mario games like I am, there are a few things that greatly stick out to you. This isn't a regular Mario game. This wasn't something I remotely thought about until I fully played through 64 for the first time, but the structure of 3D Mario games are very different to how the 2D games played out. It shouldn't blow my mind, but when I thought about it for the first time, I couldn't stop thinking about it. This is also where the game's genius really shines through, as any mission you complete, it's all up to you, the player, on what to do and how to get to Bowser. You start out fairly limited on what you can do and where you can go, but the game opens up really quickly once you obtain 3 stars. There are 7 stars in each stage, and there's very few restrictions on what stars you can get and when. You can climb up this mountain to find a star, or shoot yourself out of a cannon, maybe collect some coins. There's only a few stars that have prerequisites for completing them, like the beginning of Dire Dire Docks, or any mission that requires the invisible or metal cap. But even then, you could just choose not to tackle those missions if you don't want to. It would have been easy for the developers just to make a 2D Mario game in the 3rd dimension and call it a day, but the brilliance of Mario 64 shines through in many other ways than just being a good game. It's also a good first video game in general. If you looked at footage back in the 90s of people playing this game when it first came out, these people sucked at the game. But that's not because they actually suck at the game, it's because nobody had played anything like it before, and it makes me fall in love with Mario 64 even more when I'm put in that mindset, because it's one I've never had to deal with growing up. My first games were 3D, so I never had the trouble of figuring out how to play a game like Mario 64, but the transition to 3D in the 90s must have been quite jarring. Nintendo had to take note of this, as Mario 64 was going to be a lot of folks' first ever 3D game, so a lot of the design not only had to be great, but it had to help the player get adjusted to this new dimension of gaming, and that's where the majority of Mario 64's genius lies. The entire first floor of the game is dedicated to setting you on your way, with each individual level getting you accustomed to a mechanic the game will throw at you later on. Bob-omb Battlefield is the first level, and it's a relatively safe playground for you to explore your heart out on. Almost like an expanded courtyard, just littered with enemies now, so there's some level of danger present, but it's very little. This is just to get you used to your surroundings and comfortable with moving around in an open 3D space. The most you'll find yourself doing here is learning how to cross tight spaces, like, the bridges and such, but there's very little to no punishment if you were to fail. Whomp's Fortress is next, and it's here you'll actually be expected to competently platform, as there are bigger falls and actual death pits. You need to learn to position yourself properly here and be fully expected to move around tight gaps to be able to succeed here. Jolly Roger Bay is arguably the safest area outside of Bob-omb Battlefield. You still have a chance of dying at this level, but it's mostly if you drown, which is easily preventable. Your goal is to learn how to swim. That's pretty much it. Cool Cool Mountain is the final area on the first floor. Not only that, it is it's the most difficult and one of my favorite levels in the game. And when I say most difficult, that's not like a high bar or anything. We've established time and again that Mario games are not very difficult, but when it comes to teaching you something in a level, Cool Cool Mountain does it best. It puts just about everything you've learned to the test outside of swimming. This level is the most vertical, and it's all about judging distance and being able to position yourself accordingly. Each level on the first floor of Peach's castle is very important and serves to show how good Nintendo is at teaching its players the mechanics of their game without crazy hand-fisted tutorials that ruin the game's pacing. Sometimes. The level design for the most part in this game is still great when you move on to later areas such as the basement and the upstairs, although not every level is a banger. There are some levels in the game that you could just feel Nintendo slapped them together, which is something they even admit. The level design just kind of gets pushed to the wayside when making this game, as almost all of the development time went to both Mario's movement and getting the camera right. Not all of the later levels are bad per se, some are very divisive amongst the community, but you feel that there was a certain dip in the consistent quality barely present throughout the other levels. Where in the first floor and even the basement, the entire level was open to you and you were able to tackle whatever stars in whatever order. Of course, being able to tackle whatever stars in whatever order is still present, but the overall design became a lot more narrow and segmented with one another. Tall Mountain, Tick-Tock Clock, Rainbow Ride are all the standouts. Again, not to say those levels are bad, they're actually some of my favorites, but it is clear that the design philosophy changed somewhere while developing those levels compared to the beginning ones. It makes the overall structure of being able to tackle any star in any order a little redundant, as all of a sudden you find yourself going through the same exact portions of a level just to do something slightly different towards the top. This would actually go on to become the way that Mario Galaxy primarily makes its missions, since the level design in that game is far more linear. I also think it would have been a really easy pitfall to go down for the level design just to get outright bad when you make these levels more linear and start to take away choice from the player, but it just kind of doesn't happen, and the reason is very simple. Mario controls very, very well. In this retrospective, if you've watched everything up till now, it's very clear where my priorities lie in a Mario game. For Mario to succeed in a game, he's gotta control well first and foremost. It's why I didn't like the original Mario 1 and 2. They just didn't nail the controls, and Mario became very frustrating to control, and despite beating the original Mario beforehand, I just couldn't bring myself to do it now because it's just not very fun to play. Surprisingly, it was the controls that were the reason I didn't like Mario 64 back in the day. I made a video a long while ago documenting my first ever experience being Mario 64, and I had made it known that Mario 64 was one of my least favorite 3D Marios up until that point. I just couldn't get past the age and the controls, which I had come to learn pretty quickly that those reasons were kind of stupid. To succeed in Mario 64, you need to know what flows well with what Mario is doing at all times, chaining things together to create a very smooth experience. Mario has a triple jump, wall jump, long jump, side flip, back flip. All of those moves and more are here to help properly position yourself and not die. Even something like the back flip, a move in which I thought was kind of useless at the beginning of my playthrough, came in clutch at multiple points during my last playthrough. These are moves that made Super Mario 64 everything that it is. They're the reason this game is remembered and so beloved, and why I hold controls in a Mario game to such a high standard. There's a reason speedrunning in this game is so popular and has been for a very long time. It's the controls. Not everything is perfect, of course. It's very close to an ideal controlling Mario game, and to think Nintendo almost got it on their first try. But like I said, it's not perfect. And this also leads into the game's age and how it's been perceived over the years. When the game came out, there was absolutely nothing like it. Nothing to compare the game to, as it was the first of its kind. Now, of course, we've had a ton of games, both within Mario and other franchises, that control better and worse, and because of it, we start to see the cracks in how Mario moves. Mario's controls have aged pretty damn well for the most part. Any issues someone might have with the controls just comes down to preference. The air control with Mario is quite stiff. It's nowhere near as bad as Mario on the NES, but it's still to a point where you have to commit to the jumps you make, and it really only becomes a problem in conjunction with the very primitive camera of this game. The camera is another thing where it was very much the first of its kind, and unlike how Mario controls, you could tell that this camera was the first. It's something you can only get used to and tolerate as you play the game, and it's probably the biggest gripe that I have with the game still. The camera was made with the purpose of showing Mario where he needs to go, while also giving the player some control over what's shown. This, along with Mario's movement, is what the development team spent the most time on, and they did an okay job with it. Once you understand the camera's purpose and start listening to what it wants to show you instead of fighting it, the camera actually becomes a lot more tolerable, but it's still not ideal and definitely will never be. One of my least favorite missions of the game is the way that it is because of the mediocre camera. The actual contents of the level aren't the worst thing in the world, but due to having to make very punishable leaps of faith in this pyramid area, it just frustrated me more than anything. And once one false move, you have to climb all the way up the whole thing again. It's just not fun. It took me way too long to finish that mission, and a better camera would solve any issue that I have with the level. Another weird thing that I don't like about Mario's movement is the weird half circle that Mario does sometimes when he turns around. It's very easily preventable by flicking the stick back slightly, as if you were to just hold the stick back, Mario will make that full half circle turn. It's more of a learning curve, if anything, but arguably the biggest thing that the age has hurt in Mario 64 is just how vague some of the mission titles are. Thank God for online guides and the knowledge that I have coming back to this game, but when I first went through the game, I had a lot of trouble with a lot of these stars strictly because the names were either misleading or just gave absolutely no hints on what to do. Watch for falling rocks. Okay, I did that. Where's my f***ing star? I get why this was done. to an extent. Discovery and exploration are at the heart of this game and are huge reasons as to why I think it's so great. Going into a level for 1 star and coming out with another is a very satisfying feeling, but how the hell am I supposed to get the watch for falling rock star? If you said wall jump onto this area right after the section with the rocks, then you would be right, and I would know for a fact that this isn't your first time playing the game. There's just about 1 or 2 stars like that in about every course, and it's a little hard to excuse because it's just so weird. Metalhead Mario can move. Yeah, God, I would hope so. I mostly just chalk all of this up to really old game cheese. Stuff like this is in so many games. They want you to play the game for as long as possible. It's the same reason as to why games from the NES were so difficult. It's so they can keep you playing, and I guess for that reason, and that reason only, does it get a pass, but it's a definite sign of very poor age and when this game came out. We don't get games like this anymore. We don't get games like the original Legend of Zelda where you're just thrown out into the wild and hope for the best. We are expecting some kind of guidance with our games, and it's not like I'm expecting my hand to be held the entire time as I'm slowly walk through all of the game's mechanics and ideas. No, I hate when a game does that. It's my least favorite part of my favorite games, but when you're thrown into a level called The Secrets of Shitting Out My Ass, I'm gonna be confused. In all honesty though, I would rather take levels like that rather than go back to a structure like Super Mario Galaxy or even Super Mario Odyssey. The thing is, the structure is really the binding glue that makes this game as fantastic as it is. After I beat Mario 64 for the first time, I kind of realized that I vastly prefer the way I go about my day-to-day in Mario 64 than any other Mario game, and it strangely hasn't been properly replicated since this game, which feels a little weird to me. The freedom of choice to go out and tackle any star in any order just makes the game so much more fun, as there's just no pressure to go out and get the game done. Now, of course, you do want to be self-motivated to finish the game, but I really do think the only game killer here are the sometimes vague mission names. But I do think this makes this game very unique, knowing that you can't really get the Mario 64 experience anywhere else. Not in Mario Galaxy, definitely not in Mario Sunshine, and contrary to what some believe, not in Mario Odyssey either. Mario Odyssey is the closest we have to a true Mario 64 successor, but it misses the mark in some very key areas that cut it short from straight up being Super Mario 64 2, which is something I would really like to see someday. We'll get to that when we talk about Mario Odyssey, obviously. But with Mario 64, Nintendo didn't just redefine platforming, they set a new gold standard. They had created something that had never been done before. And with that massive success, you think they spend the rest of the generation refining the formula, right? Well, no. Instead, Mario took a back seat while Nintendo turned their attention to the next big leap, the Dolphin, a much more powerful console, a new era of gaming, and a design choice that made it look like a lunchbox. With Mario's new adventure on the horizon, Nintendo would need this absolute console seller of a title, something that would set the standard for this new era of both Mario and Nintendo. A game that, God, why is it Luigi's Mansion? Oh, never mind, we got Super Mario Sunshine a little while later. Yeah, I'm not really sure if I like this one.